Well, how's it going, everybody? Great to be here. Yes, it certainly is. And what is really awesome are all the messages of gratitude and support I've been receiving since the last few videos. It certainly makes it all worthwhile. Now, here's my latest video. It's an interview with Professor Ian Plimer from the South Australian University. He's a professor of geoengineering and of mining, and knows a lot more about climate change than your average scientist. So sit back and listen as we pose questions of an astrophysics nature.
Ian Plimer.
Yes, a very good afternoon, Professor Plimer. This is Steve Johnson. How are you, sir?
Yeah, sorry, I was a bit pushed this morning. I had a group of people with me. I was showing them around. And
no problem at all. I've been reading up about some of the book reviews on Heaven and Earth, and some of them are quite scathing.
Do you think I worry about that?
Of course not.
The people who are advocates and who have an agenda, the most scathing ones are by extremely well qualified people. One of them is a chap who looks at instrumentation and optics for telescopes. He claims he's an astronomer.
Oh.
Another plays with mathematics and seems to suddenly be an expert in geology. Do you think those really worry me?
I've seen one of them also, even though he calls himself a professor, he seems to be an advocate for the nuclear power industry.
Yeah, quite, yes. Yeah. You just got to follow the money with their interests and look at their conflicts. But this is what it's really about. It's a magnificent scam. We're seeing the evolution of the world's biggest financial scam.
Do you think the media have finally stopped their hype and their fear campaign about global warming?
No, they do it in other ways, in subtle ways. You have to understand that gone are the days of having journalists who were chain smokers and alcoholics and had done court rounds and been working in newspapers since I was 16. Now we've got people who are using positions in the media for advocacy. They really are illiterate, they certainly know no science, and they can't write sentences in clear English. So I'm not surprised the media's still at it, but in a slightly different way.
Well, the way I see it, sir, there's no longer any reporters, there's only repeaters. Nobody does any reporting anymore.
Oh, there are one or two reporters left, but they're the old school. These are people who I described, the chain smokers, the drunks, seen it all, and there are not many of them left. Yes, a very large number of them are repeaters. They repeat stuff off blog sites. They don't do what journalists should do, and that is fact-check. They don't look for information independently themselves. They just repeat what's said, and on they go. And once it's repeated enough, it becomes a truth, doesn't it?
That was Karl Rove who said that.
Yes, that's exactly right, and also in 1984, and also in Animal Farm.
You got it.
We're seeing processes which we've seen before.
Indeed. Well, what are your thoughts on the government of Australia taxing carbon emissions?
Well, I think we need a bit of leadership. If they were to tax, and if carbon dioxide was so dangerous, they should turn off the central heating in all the buildings in Canberra, turn off the lights, stop flitting around the country in jets trying to tell us we've got to pay for the carbon dioxide that they put into the atmosphere. And, of course, the ultimate solution is if carbon dioxide is so terribly dangerous, we breathe in 0.04%, we breathe out 4%. The solution to that is to drop dead. These people are hypocrites. They are trying to play on the ignorance of the public. The public is treated arrogantly as being stupid, and the public has woken up that they are being conned by government and frauds who are supporting them.
So do you think it's an economic tactic, or do you think it's a political stunt, or is it genuinely focused on environmental concerns?
Well, I think in part it's an economic tactic in that they've overspent any money they ever had, and now they've got to claw it back with tax. I think it's a political stunt in that there are various inner-city people who are moderately well off and don't really know where their food and energy comes from, and they feel it's a good idea to have a tax on carbon dioxide. And the last thing on the agenda is the environment. Governments don't care about the environment. They're only concerned about having bigger armies of bureaucrats and having more cash.
Now, our Earth is being affected by climate change. That's quite obvious. It's not exactly global warming, but it is changing.
Well, it's changed ever since the first day this Earth was formed, 4,567 million years ago. And it keeps changing. Tell me something I don't know.
Well, it is becoming more evident that it's not only the Earth that's changing, it's the other planets in our solar system that are being affected. Isn't that not correct?
Funny about that. You know, the conductor of the orchestra is the sun. The first violins water vapour, and the second violins is carbon dioxide. Second violins always follow the first violins, and the whole lot is actually performed by the sun.
Well, as we speak right now, Professor Plimer, on the 8th day of July 2011, there's a storm on Saturn that is 8 times the size of the Earth that has never been seen before. Do you think that's just a coincidence?
There's a number of odd things that happen, and the better the instrumentation we have, then the more odd things we observe. 10 years ago, if someone had said, look, maybe solar activity might have given us a storm on Saturn, I would be sceptical. 10 years ago, if people said these unusual solar activities might have given earthquakes and volcanoes, I would be sceptical. But we're now measuring many more things we didn't measure before, and I'd have to say my mind has been opened, and the effect of the sun, I think, has been greatly underestimated. And storms on Saturn, various magnetic changes, pulses of radiation, changes in climate, we really have to go to the conductor of the orchestra.
Well, indeed, matter is being changed on Earth as well. It's being affected by strange waves and strange beams being bombarded on Earth from deep space. There's even a neutrino observer that's being built and set up in Antarctica. Do you know much about this at all, sir?
Well, it's not my area of expertise, but I knew an observatory was built there. I know there's one in Japan, in a deep mine. I know there's one in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm very much aware that there's a really exciting area of science dealing with what happens deep in space, such as a supernova eruption and how that affects the upper atmosphere, how we get streams of neutrinos. But it's not my area of expertise, but I'm fascinated by these sort of areas of science which overlap, and the compartmentalisation of science makes it very, very difficult for those who want to follow one path, and that is we humans change everything. They've got it in a compartment. They don't look at anything else.
Do you think compartmentalization of education has been to blame for a lot of people making ignorant statements in the scientific community?
No, I think it's worse than that. I think the education system has been used for political purposes. I have seen in 40 years of lecturing university students that they are less literate, they are less numerate, they cannot demonstrate a clarity of thought, they cannot write, and they don't have the fundamentals of an education, and that is a knowledge of the language, knowledge of history, a knowledge of literature, and a knowledge of the basics of science such that they can integrate. And our education system is very much being used as a mechanism of stopping people getting on the streets, in other words, stopping the unemployment queues, and creating a political class that is going to continue the power structure.
Well, sir, even more recently, heading back to the sun, I have read some reports that the heliosphere is actually shrinking from the sun. Do you think this is a coincidence at this point in time?
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence. The heliosphere does change. I'm not an expert on solar activities. The work of Oliver Manuel I read and enjoy. However, I think what has happened is that we are now observing much more than we did in the past. And we're seeing all these events which may be a coincidence, they may be unrelated, they may be related. And this is why science is not settled. This is why you can't make major decisions based on science, which is still evolving.
What is your take on Zecharia Sitchin's assertion of a nemesis to our sun, like a Planet X or Nibiru?
Well, the sun has always changed. It's got cyclical changes, it's got other changes which are not cyclical. It's been doing that for thousands of millions of years, so I'm not surprised that if we get a coincidence of a number of events, and these might be tectonic, these might be orbital, these might be cosmic, these might be solar, that you can get very rapid sudden changes. Now, it's happened before, it obviously happened again. So I don't have a problem with people getting very interested in solar activity. My problem is people predicting catastrophes. We've had thousands of years of people doing that, and if just one global catastrophe were correct, then we wouldn't be here.
Well, indeed, we've seen Y2K, and that didn't pan out exactly how they thought.
No, not quite, but it made a lot of people a lot of money.
It sure did, and pushed in a lot of new laws, too, that are still...
Oh, yes, yeah, and this is partly the problem I have, is that we've got the Baptists and bootleggers working together on this. There are new laws coming, we are losing our freedoms, we are being more restricted, and we're going to be paying more tax.
What are your thoughts on the Earth expansion theory? There's some people who are saying that the Earth itself is actually growing and we may be going through a growth spurt. This is why we got so many volcanoes and earthquakes. Is that not possible?
Well, plate tectonics is the overriding geological idea to explain the Earth. And like all great overriding theories, there are holes in it. And I have always been interested in the expanding Earth theory, simply because there are good mineralogical reasons why we could expand the Earth. And some of the problems which we have in explaining plate tectonics could be explained by having a partial expanding Earth and tectonics operating in a slightly modified way. 30 years ago, I would have said rubbish. I'm now older and I've seen much more, and I'm much more able to be more generous in spirit and have an open mind. So I would say that I couldn't make the conclusion you made, but my mind is open and stays open.
Is it possible, sir, that the removal of carbon-based elements like gas and oil is actually removing the tectonic lubricants from underneath the crust and causing more earthquakes? Is that not possible?
The volume of material that's being removed is very, very small.
Okay.
The forces involved in tectonism are huge, and I think, although that idea we should consider, the orders of magnitude are very, very much different.
Okay.
And I doubt whether there's any role between removal of liquids and tectonism. We've had tectonism going on for thousands of millions of years.
Sure.
We get pulses. We're currently living since 1912 in a time that's been fairly quiet with earthquakes and volcanoes, and we may well be having a time which is speeding up.
I'm not qualified in any way to make any qualified statements on this, but I do believe the area of space that we're going through at the moment is causing a change in the decay rate of radioactive matter.
Well, that's a really fascinating concept, and two scientists independently came up with this. Jan Weiser from Ottawa and Nia Shaviv, the Israeli astronomer. And from two different approaches, they worked out that every 143 million years, planet Earth, that's plus or minus about 10 million years, planet Earth has a bad address. And this bad address is where we get bombarded more by cosmic radiation. We have greater and more rapid climate changes. Now, we have been in this current ice age, and we've had 6 big ice ages, but we've been in this current ice age for 34 million years. The astronomers, if you read what Shaviv says and what Weiser says, we have probably a bad address. Now, we've never had humans on Earth before when we've had a bad cosmic address, and unusual things may well happen, and I suspect that's what we're seeing.
Right. Do you ever implicitly trust the reports from NASA and JPL?
I read everything critically. Be they come from NASA, JPL, be they one of my friends writing a scientific paper, that is the basis of science, to critically evaluate everything. The set of data that I might use would be very different from what NASA might use, and so it's not a case of trusting, it's a case of using my God-given brain to be a critical thinker.
And do you think that's what mainstream media are relying on, people just not using their brains?
Oh, very much so. Not being critical thinkers. We haven't taught people to be critical thinkers, and this is why earlier I mentioned English and English literature. If you read and study English literature, you have to critically evaluate the book that you've read. That is the way of learning critical thinking. By doing philosophy is another way of learning critical thinking. But you don't learn critical thinking by having a political agenda rammed down your throat at school.
How about life on other planets in other parts of the universe?
Well, I think there's a 100% chance of having life on other planets, and that will be bacterial life. And we will find that on Mars. We will firstly find fossil life, and then I think deeper down or in various unusual ecologies, we may well find modern life. And I think that would be absolutely incredible, because that would be a theological revolution. It would be equivalent to Darwin in 1859 publishing his work, and by learning that we're not the only life in the universe, I think would really be a theological revolution, and I look forward to it.
It will be a penultimate moment for everybody, for sure.
Oh, yes, very much so. It might actually flatten out our egos a little bit.
One could hope. One of the greats that inspired me to learn more about the universe was the late, great Dr. Carl Sagan. What are your thoughts on him, sir?
He's a champion. And his work, I think, was seminal in inspiring thousands of people. He's great.
Despite the machinations of the mainstream media, do you think people are indeed slowly waking up?
No, I think they're waking up quickly.
Oh, at a rapid pace?
Very much so. I have been travelling enormously in the last 8 weeks and averaging a public talk every second day. I am very heartened by the fact that people are starting to wake up. Now, I would have hoped that it would have started to wake up by evaluating the science, but that hasn't happened. What has happened is people have realised that a wonderful, warm, fuzzy idea and ideology is now going to cost them. And it's going to cost them a huge amount. They don't quite know how much it is, but it's going to be a lot. And so what they are saying is, well, look, I wonder if this settled science and everything we're being told, I wonder if it really is correct. And thank God for the internet. Thank God for blog sites. And people have actually been able to go and say, well, wait a minute, there isn't a consensus in science. And by the way, there are some very eminent scientists out there who are coming up with a contrary view, and a lot of what we're being told is incommensurate with what I found on the internet. So thank God for the internet.
Yeah, and that's probably why they want to shut it down and censor it.
Yes.
Finally, Professor Ian Plimer, sir, what message would you like to send to the Australian public and the global citizens collectively about climate change?
Your brain is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. Use it.
Fantastic. Listen, thank you very much, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. All the best.